you so much for joining us tonight. I hope everyone's enjoying their evening so far. My name is Hannah Jennings, and I'm a community organizer at Tech in Motion. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our leadership panel on modernizing legacy systems with applied AI. For those of you attending your first Tech in Motion event, evenings like this are exactly what our community is all about, bringing together the tech community, learning from industry leaders, and just giving you all an opportunity to connect with your peers. This evening, you'll hear firsthand from senior IT executives representing a range of industries, all whom are tackling the challenge of modernizing their systems with AI. We have Gregg back to host another fantastic panel, so thank you for being here. After the panel discussion, we'll leave some time for audience Q&A, so feel free to just raise your hand and ask a quick question to our panelists, and they'll do their best to get to as many as possible. To kick things off, I'm going to hand it over to Max and Rose from Motion Recruitment, our founding partners. We'll share a few more opening thoughts before we transition to the panel discussion.
Hello, hello. Thanks, Hannah. Welcome to Tech in Motion. We give just a little warm welcome, kind of round of applause for Hannah and our amazing marketing team for this event. It's great to be back in Chicago for our first in-person event. My name's Max. I'm our executive director behind the team over at Motion Recruitment.
And my name is Rose Baldonado. I help lead one of our data recruiting teams. So kind of to Max's point, this is an incredible turnout that we have tonight. So I think it really showcases how the tech community has really been part of our mission of let's get together, let's learn, let's innovate. So.
Yeah, now a part of Kelly, Motion supports organizations and job seekers looking to navigate the just always constantly changing tech industry, whether it's to build specialized teams, modernize systems, scale infrastructure, or push on cloud data, AI initiatives, of course. The focus for us is partnering up with our customers to help them move faster with confidence.
Yeah, so simply put, if you are on the job market, you're hiring, or you're about to undergo a modernization, you're like, where do I go from here? What are my competitors doing? Definitely feel free to reach out to any of us. We honestly tackle these challenges every day in any capacity. So we'll be around. Definitely see our booth if you haven't already, or find somebody with one of these fun name tags. But enough about that. Let's get to the panel.
Yeah, our speakers have firsthand experience in building and deploying AI programs in regulated environments, seeing the power, but also, of course, the limitations. I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of these folks on stage tonight, as well as our office, and help build out some really cool teams. So I'm personally really excited to see what they have to say. So they're already out here. Welcome to the stage. But we have Mary Grygleski, VP of Global from AI Collective, Nathan Frank, Director of Machine Learning and Ops over at Grainger, Ishu Jaswal, Head of Data Science at Attune, Jen Anderson, Founder and Principal of Aurvia Group, and our host, Gregg Walrod, co-founder of Secret Sauce. A little round of applause. Gregg, you want to take it away?
Thank you, Max. I really appreciate it. The first thing I always like to say is thank you, Max, Hannah, and the Tech in Motion team for having us here tonight. What I always like to say is we don't get to have events like this unless people like Max and Hannah and their team and Tech in Motion bring us together tonight. So thank you to all of you in your team for having us here tonight, and thank you for all attending. A little bit about myself quickly. I'll keep this super abridged. My name's Gregg. I've been in tech about 22 years, started off driving the Geek Squad car a long time ago. That turned into web development. I built engineering teams here in Chicago from 5 to 100 at companies like Nerdery and Inspire 11, built product companies from there. And then most recently, as they mentioned, I'm working at a company called Secret Sauce that I built with my wife, which is essentially doing a little bit of product marketing and tech, kind of the dabble of what you need as a startup small business as you're growing. And so that's kind of what I've been doing for the last few years. with that said, I am also a little bit of a free agent, so if you need some help, I'm just going to throw that out there. But before we get into our panelists, what I like to always ask just kind of is, how many folks in this room are like in engineering, data engineering, like would call yourself a developer? Okay, so good amount. How many would say you're like in product design space? Okay. Like business, operations, okay? Marketing, sales. Okay. And then how many folks would say they're like new in their career, like academia, like just about to graduate? Okay, awesome. So with that, I think we have a good feel for the room. I feel like we have a really good mix, and I really appreciate you all joining us tonight. I would love to hand it off to our panelists and give them some time to introduce themselves and for us to kind of start to dive in.
Hey, nice to meet you all. My name is Nathan. As they said, I currently lead our machine learning platform and operations teams at Grainger. Very short commute from me today. I was on the 18th floor of this building, so that was really nice. I've been working in machine learning, software engineering for more than a decade. Once upon a time, I studied physics and astronomy, and I found myself continually sort of going from sort of research towards applications. I really loved building systems, building telescopes, building data monitoring pipelines, and so an academic path was not the one for me, and I got into technology and machine learning. Took a stint in sports analytics, which was really fun, and another Chicago company called Stats Perform, formerly known as Stats LLC, if you're familiar. So that was super fun. Got to combine my passions of basketball and math and just being a nerd. And then I did some sort of data science and machine learning consulting work for a few years, which was also really fun because I got to kind of take a step back and understand, how do I branch out from these sort of niche domains where I'd been applying ML into sort of understanding how does it show up in other industries. And I found that what I really liked was sort of building systems, being in between data scientists and machine learning scientists who are really going deep on problems, architecture, model composition, algorithms, software engineering teams who are building and shipping these systems at scale, and then like product and business folks who are trying to understand what do our customers need, and that kind of coalesced into a platform role. And so I've been working in machine learning platforms, being that translator and that intermediary for, the last 5 years or so. So it's a bit about me. Happy to chat after this.
Awesome. All right, well, hi everyone. My name's Jen Anderson. So I consider myself a decision scientist. I have a PhD in behavioral neuroscience, and I coupled that with a master's in computer science because I wanted to take and understand how we make decisions and mold that into systems that can scale. So I was always fascinated. This 3-pound ball of Jell-O between our ears, right? If you do the math, eating about 2,000 calories a day, that's like 40 watts of energy. With 40 watts of energy, the light, in a light bulb, the energy needed for a light bulb, you can do advanced visual search, you can do metacognition, you can do all sorts of amazing things. So what sorts of heuristics or algorithms exist in this wetware, and what can I extract and bring into systems thinking? So I started my career in academia, sold out to industry, I'll admit it. I started as a data scientist at a small ed tech firm, but found that I really enjoyed building systems. I took their SharePoint system into a portal that students and teachers could use to discover data insights. I soon wanted more of that, though, so I expanded into retail grocery, working at Ahold Delhaize for a couple years, helping to modernize their front-end platform. And then I had the opportunity at the Aspen Group to build their web platform and commercial platforms from scratch that supports 5 separate brands into one unified unit. So I did that for a while, loved building systems, soon found out, hey, I want to be more with the business stakes, with the business, and make those decisions and build those systems with founders. So I started my own consulting company called Aurvia Group. I work with founders and leaders who want to have engineering leadership, maybe can't afford the whole thing, and want to explore AI for their particular niche that they've discovered. And so we work together to deliver on that. So it's awesome to be here. I'm excited to share my story, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Ishu Jaswal. I have over 13 years of experience in the data science industry, and most of that is coming from building conversational AI products. And with that, I am currently managing the data science department at Attune AI. At Attune, we are building agentic voice AI solutions for healthcare companies, where we are helping the organizations to engage the members and the patients to conduct the conversations at scale and with empathy. And my role sits at the intersection of collaborating a lot with the engineering folks and the product and the business, where we are like actively supporting the back and solving like production solutions, like how to take these models, bring them like ready to be launched in production at scale with the cost that we can manage and with the other metrics that we need to be keeping in our control. So really excited to be here talking to you all about the topic today.
Hello, I'm Mary Grygleski. I'm currently the VP of, Global VP of Western Hemisphere for the AI Collective. And AI Collective is a grassroots think tank organization. Actually, some of you I recognize because you've been attending my meetups too. So I'm very active too in the community. And I actually met Gregg. That was way before COVID when he was at Nerdery. Exactly, yeah, 2015 something. So anyway, so I've been active in the tech community too in Chicago. But my background though, I was a software engineer for actually 25 plus years and kind of went through, the internet when it was born and then all the way like C, Unix and getting to Java. So I worked too, and I moved actually from Massachusetts to California and then to here to Chicago. And I've been like transplant of Chicago for over 20 years now. So I worked at Chicago Mercantile Exchange, Board Options Exchange, and even in the south suburbs for LK Manufacturing and actually, what is it, Panduit, that they make data center cables and all these things. So essentially to enterprise Java applications. So tonight when Hannah asked me to come to the panel, I said, oh, perfect. I actually worked in kind of more legacy systems and I can speak to that. And then I have to kind of jump back my career is that I became a developer advocate after like 25 years of software engineering. So advocate is when we go out and speak, at conferences, speak to the audience and helping people, essentially helping all of you to succeed. And I kind of still have this mindset. I'm currently on sabbatical and still running my AI collective and also doing my Java users group. And I love the community. And I really believe Chicago, I want to build it like San Francisco, where there's like a lot of the vibe in there. I think we should bring it to here to Chicago too. So very happy to be here. Thank you.
Yes, Nathan, I think you started the snaps. I would agree with the snaps there. No, so Mary, the team here, I just appreciate all of you being here and sharing your stories. I really look forward to tonight. Just want to explain to how folks tonight's going to go. We're going to have kind of 3 sections that we kind of built, and then we're going to build it into like 20 minutes of questions. I would kind of moderate that based on how we go. And I guess I just kind of want to, the first topic that we have here is around, we got really into this, maybe even deeper into this when we had our call around the reality of legacy systems and the risk and kind of like, what does that bring? And I really appreciated that dialogue that we had. And so Nick, Nathan, I'll start with you as we're talking about like enterprise systems and maybe the stability between like a legacy company versus a startup, how does that change where AI gets deployed? And I know that might be like a curveball throwing in, but I'd love for us to just kind of dive right in.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I think every company or every organization cares about like customer trust, right? They care about reliability and stability of whatever it is they're running, operating, or producing. I think the big difference I think about between like a large enterprise, or maybe there's an implication that if you have legacy systems, maybe that means you've been around for a while, right? And maybe a startup or a smaller company is really the blast radius and your risk appetite, right? So, you think about risk, you manage risk differently. Larger enterprises or more established companies have been around longer and have built processes to mitigate and manage risk in different ways, right? And so some of those institutional patterns are there for very good reason to minimize the impact of any degradation, a failure, an incident, right? And to manage through those. And so I think as we think about how does that inform our decisions about how and where we deploy AI, I think it's the same principles. You want to minimize that blast radius. You want to make sure that you understand exactly what actions those AI systems are taking and on whose behalf, right? Are they interacting with your customers directly? Is there a human in the loop? What sort of failure modes do you anticipate? What are your rollback mechanisms, right? So how do you contain and manage that risk effectively while still moving forward, while still progressing, while still leveraging all the benefits of these modern systems? So
You talked a little bit of, like you said, blast radius a couple times, and I think as I think about that, I think about like exposure, kind of like your exposure to risk. So I'd love to open this up to anybody in the group, Nathan, or as we go down the line. What do you think is an AI example that's delivered real operational value, but maybe held back on like some risk mitigation, or like how do you think through that, as your company scale, your team size? I know I'm throwing like another just
I'll give a quick example
curveball
and then I'll
there
pass it on.
with
Yeah.
AI. Anytime we talk about it, it
Yeah.
becomes a lot.
I mean, I think I mentioned one of the methodologies, which is the concept of a human in the loop, right? You think about customer service, there's a lot of really great examples of where companies maybe went awry by exposing AI directly to their customers too early before they really understood what decisions it could make, and they gave away free trucks, for example. And so that's a great principle to think about is how can you get the benefits of operational efficiency from AI in automatically pulling in information, right, going into your systems and reading and surfacing relevant insights, maybe even constructing responses, but not being the decision authority about exactly how you respond or where you deploy those ideas or those solutions.
Ishu or Jen, Mary?
No, I think I was just thinking about giving an example because we are ourselves like building agentic voice AI solutions for healthcare. So it's very important to build something at scale that will reliably like deploy in production. But the risks come down to like what the business outcome or the impact of failure will make, right? And in healthcare, it's the impact is huge because if you mess up a particular information about a particular patient or something, it can make the clinician for someone like make bad decisions based on that information. So I agree with whatever Nathan said, but yeah, just wanted to add this extra example there.
Can I add one little thing?
Yeah.
Great. So I think, as you know, when we make decisions, we like to make informed decisions. And when we don't have all the information, we try to make as best decision we can. But oftentimes in organizations, you get that analysis paralysis. You have a lot of spinning around in circles because you're trying to figure out and predict what's going to happen on a set of incomplete data. And when it comes to legacy systems, more often than not, they're not really instrumented well. You don't really know what's going on. You've inherited something that all the people who've written it are gone. There's no documentation. You have no idea. So until you really know what you don't know and you start to instrument how that system actually works, you're always going to be making a decision based in fear. But if you can reduce the risk by understanding more, you can make an informed decision, and then you can be more successful in that sense. So.
The number one thing that I heard there, and I can say this to my developers in the room, documentation. Please write documentation. Mary, you mentioned security, early on in our conversations, and I wonder, you mentioned like some of the bigger organizations that you've worked with. Like, what do you think AI should look like organizationally, like early on in some of these like larger, really regimented,
Sure. I think,
areas?
I think primarily too, when we work with AI, we really have to pay attention to all the data. Data is what kind of makes, drives things of value in AI. And it is very important to protect the data as well. So I kind of immediately think of like security, especially now too with all the agents. I feel, we want to continue to do creative innovation, doing things. And a lot of times though, is interestingly, the Silicon Valley mentality is let's do it first and then not paying attention to what it means, right? So sometimes I also wonder too with agents, right? We're talking about automating things and have agents do things, and at the same time, how can you be sure, right? Agents is going to do something autonomously and pull some data back and maybe display a website is actually incorrect, something that can be like fake or something, and then we are kind of thinking, okay, let's trust this AI thing and do stuff, and you click on the link, and maybe it's going to lead you to somewhere that's not safe. So all those things, like for agents doing all these kind of, things that it's supposed to be, very fast and efficient, if we don't pay attention to it, it can actually come back malicious too. I mean, agent itself can't actually figure something out, something on its own. As such, there's no true intelligence in all of these agents too. Because all of the current LLM is just doing pattern matching, essentially superior pattern matching. So it's all these non-deterministic type of ways of solving problems can come back with the wrong thing, or kind of that's where I think a lot of people malicious is trying to take advantage of that and do something that's not right, like that. So anyway, but the whole point I'm trying to say is that the security aspect, especially with data, is a very sensitive area. We need to protect the data, essentially, what we're doing with it. We can't just fully be blindly trusting what an agent is doing, what the LLM is doing. We still need human intelligence. We need to be in control, make sure what gets generated, what's coming back is correct, and is right, is not causing problem, is what I'm kind of concerned with. So
Nathan, I saw maybe you were gonna unmute. No? Okay, and just checking, like to keep it going. Issue, kind of as we're looking at, as you mentioned, like doing agentic in healthcare with AI, where do you guys kind of understand when it becomes from experimentation to like something that you're actually going to roll out? Because like as Mary just mentioned, like becomes a little, messy, I guess, for, cleaner words. How do you guys kind of grade that?
Yeah, I think the biggest shift is thinking about AI being just a model to AI being a system engineering. It's not just like going to be a simple model, which in experiment you're trying to get the best accuracy. You're trying like different innovation around like how you get the smartest model out with the best data there. But when it comes to production, it's not just about accuracy, it's about more things like what data drift looks like. How do you stay compliant with your healthcare in our domain, basically? How do you make your AI deterministic? What do you do if it fails? Like if it's uncertain, like how do you handle that fallback? And then, of course, like the guardrails and all the safety that you have to manage. So this a lot comes into when you actually start deploying into production. And to build everything around that, you need to incorporate it into your processes. I think 3 things come to mind. First is like, how do you measure success? That's basically like setting up a right evaluation framework that is not just judging your model's accuracy at the lowest level and giving you that, oh, this is the 99% accurate model, it's going to perform well now. You have to build a framework around how your AI is going to be performing and identifying the metrics that matter the most at the level of like use case. So in my use case, as we deal with conversations, we care about like how we measure the success of a conversation. Where are the areas in the conversation workflow where our AI is doing well and where it fails and why it fails, like what the behavior looks like. If it like consistently failing on those areas, how much population it's impacting, how much downstream impact it's making. And then, of course, second thing is like coming down to like identifying how do you do the determinism, basically, how you make your AI like be more deterministic and handle the fallbacks. Like if it's uncertain, what do we do there? Like how do we balance that? So I think overall, it's just like a lot you have to build around when putting things in production. While in your experiment phase, you can just like just prove model is working. It's not that simple. Like it's not like, okay, this might seem to work versus like it will actually work or not.
May I share an insight to add to that? So, when we deploy typical software to, production, you have a test suite that you run, and, you've got very clear paths about what fails and what doesn't. And when it passes, that's your quality gate to go forward. Now, the problem with LLMs, like has been said, is they're non-deterministic. And so you will have cases where it just fails. Maybe 1% of the time, but it will fail. And when it fails in production, it's too late. You've already lost the trust of the customer. So one insight that I'd like to share with you all is start to record what sort of inputs are coming into your model. So if it's a chatbot, start understanding what sort of inputs are coming into the model and make that part of your golden test set that then you run through your versioned model and then you map the outputs to. And you see, do those mapped outputs actually cluster to what's expected, or do they actually map to what's not? And if it gives you some insight, before maybe you go forward with that next version of the prompt or whatever, it gives you time to go ahead and adjust. So I just wanted to share that insight with all of you who are building LLMs in production.
No, and Jen, not to like ask you to speak more, my next question honestly was, as you've been in kind of this consulting space and working with different companies, like what do you feel blocks AI initiatives first? Is it the architecture? Is it data? Is it human decision making? Like kind of what stops these legacy companies from just being like, I'm in?
Yeah, for sure. So I would say probably a little bit of all three, but it kind of happens in a certain sequence, I'd say. So architecture, right? That's where the problem exists. The data, that's kind of it defines how deep the problem goes. And then the human part of it is like, whatever finding you come up with, are you going to act on that or not? And most humans won't unless incentivized. So I'm going to share a bit of a story from one of my previous enterprise roles. So I had inherited this marketing website that did scheduling, marketing materials, scheduled appointments for, some services that were being done. And it was on this old 20-year-old WordPress website, no documentation, nothing. But we were mandated to pull this over into the new supported infrastructure. Fantastic. Easy micro front end type of approach. We've got, the page is going to bring them over. Easy, right? Well, when we started to instrument, we started to make very unsettling discoveries. So we found out, when you have a marketing site, you send signals of conversions up to your ad partners. So like, oh, this type of customer wants, solution A, so I'm going to make campaigns and double down on this type of ad campaign to drive traffic to the site. Well, they were all wrong. The wrong campaigns, the wrong customer classification, sometimes null data being sent upstream. Nobody knew. And so what happens when you build AI on top of crappy data? It's amplified. And to make matters worse, the executives were making decisions based on this wrong data. So the A/B tests that we did, garbage. All of the decisions around where we should go with the company, garbage. So we had to stop that modernization, and we just had to instrument the heck out of it and understand what the heck was going on and fix that data layer, which in and of itself was a huge project. And then, so that was fun. And on the human side, what I've discovered is, like I said, you've got to incentivize people to make a decision. You could go and build the most beautiful AI product in the world, but if nobody trusts your system or nobody is incentivized to use it, guess what? Your adoption rate, 0. So all of those three vectors, I think are very important when considering adopting AI. Thanks.
Ishu, I thought maybe. Yeah.
Wanted to add,
Yeah,
when she was
go for it.
explaining about the garbage data, we use a very common phrase at our company, garbage in, garbage out.
Mary, did I see you?
Yeah,
Yeah, I was going to say too, like sometimes, like especially with companies that are working, already have existing systems running, people are doing things, the same way every day. I think there's also that the cultural side of things in a company that needs to be upgraded, so to speak, because I think another thing we all know, when AI first came out, everybody all of a sudden was very scared because they thought, oh, now the AI is going to take over our jobs. And then because of that, then people start to feel like, oh, I don't want to work with it because it's going to take my jobs away. But as such, what we are finding out is that the AI that we fear that it could do magic is actually nothing but just, like a giant super pattern matching machine that can do certain jobs very well, but a lot of things too we can't really trust it because, like, let's say we want to do financial transaction, I'm not going to trust it to manage all my money too because of the non-deterministic type of thing, right? It's not that you ask it the 10 times and gives you back different answers. So those kind of things. But anyway, coming back, I think because of this fear, so for any companies that trying to adopt, and there's got to be some kind of a concerted effort in the company, the leadership, to reassure people it's not going to take your jobs away. Not only that, it just provides some training, everybody learning, encouraging, and make the business, maybe executives or leaders of the company be accountable for, they should be stakeholders to support the effort to upgrade themselves, things like that. I think it needs to be really a whole like cultural shift of a company. AI is not just tech, but also like a cultural shift too for a company to kind of get adapted to as well, I feel. So.
Yeah, no, thank you all for sharing that, Mary. I completely agree. I think as you're thinking about AI, it kind of has to be thought of as like another employee or another department in your company, and how you're talking to it, how you're reviewing it, how you're going along. And I think we're going to get to that a little bit as we get to our human in the middle conversation. But I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I think we're all sitting there. I don't know, maybe I'll say a joke here, but like the T600 is going to like come over and like take over for us. Sorry for anybody younger than Terminator right now. But I think we're all kind of looking at it like, where does this take us and where are things going? And, I think what I'd like to dive into before, because I think the human part is going to be the biggest part of our conversation. So I just want to jump to something quick. As we were in our conversation, and I'll point this to you, Nathan, we were kind of talking about, like, with AI, you can build custom, there's hybrid, you can take something off the shelf. Like, where does that kind of balance win with legacy companies? Like, is there a way to maybe win with hybrid? And you have all these AI companies that are like, hey, I built this. And I think, at least for me personally, there's a lot of people that have spent like 5, 6, 7 years doing the legwork. How do we maybe adapt and bring a hybrid in versus, because I don't think there's a lot of companies now, or at least a lot of VCs that are like, hey, I'm going to support a startup from scratch that's pure AI that doesn't already have a model or, all of that built. So how does the company kind of adapt and grow from that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think you kind of alluded to how do we think about technology? There's off-the-shelf components, right? Think about your email client. Unless you are a company building an email client, you're not going to go reinvent an email client just to send emails, right? You're going to buy one off the shelf. And on the other end, you have completely custom technologies or custom software systems. These are things that are probably core to your business, that you maybe have proprietary data, or you have a very specific business process that you've built around. Everything else is what we might call hybrid. It's in the middle. It's maybe you have legacy systems, maybe you are using a vendor technology that you built around. And I think whether you like it or not, if you're in a legacy company or an enterprise that's been around for a while, you probably have a lot of hybrid systems. You probably have a lot of potentially inherited legacy systems that you've built pieces around or built on. I think the thing that I like to think about is where's the operational risk and where's the value, right? There's nothing inherently wrong with legacy systems if you can still operate them, if the risk of change is still low, right? But if you have a system that's so brittle that you can't change it, that you can't update it or can't adapt it, then that's when you start thinking about, is it time to rip this out and really make a large-scale change? Otherwise, you're your value is going to be, your effort is much more valuable in building around that, understanding what sort of APIs do we need to build on top of this to expose data that we need to start building out a data platform so we can build AI systems, so we can get that new value without changing the fundamentals of the system that's powering the business, right? Maybe that's, how are you doing your logistics? How are you understanding your supply chain? What does your transportation network look like? How are you taking and fulfilling orders? Just basics of running a business, right? Those things don't necessarily need to be swapped out and changed or fully customized to be able to adapt to the benefits of AI, or where you may want to inject those newer methodologies for things like a better search experience or personalized recommendations on your e-commerce platform, or customer service, support and automation. And so I think the hybrid approach is the one that tends to win when we're trying to adapt, legacy systems and build and modernize and bring in the benefits of AI.
Thank you. The rest of the group, thank you. I think, go ahead. You have something?
No, just wanted to add that to a little bit more to it. When we are picking up, like even off the shelf, I think we have to consider the cost aspect of it. Like, first, already Nathan mentioned why you need to change it, right? Like that's first aspect of it, like what you're trying to change. Are you changing the customer experience or making more efficiency, or like maybe the cost saving? But when selecting like off the shelf too, like you have to be careful, because you cannot pick up these big best performing models, apply in front of everything, and then just assume that, oh, we are going to sustain like at scale, which is not possible. So something to be careful about is like making those decisions with like how the cost of experiment translates into actual production cost.
And I think the other thing, you kind of hint on this in your question around, there's a lot of companies that are building AI platforms or AI tools, and they just want you to go all in on that. I think a lot, especially as a leading machine learning platform teams, we're building out the infrastructure for a lot of other teams to leverage. I think a lot about control, right? Flexibility and control. Am I going to be waiting on a vendor to change something for 6 or 9 months for it to land on their roadmap? Or can I change it next month when it meets our needs, right? So like, we are all in on open source. We are all in on things that we can build and scale ourselves. And of course, it makes sense to have vendors in the mix for a lot of reasons. Some of it might be risk reduction. Maybe you need to purchase a vendor product for compliance purposes, or because it comes with certain SLAs and support structures that you need when you're operating a business at scale. But I think absent those things, I tend to, my personal philosophy, prioritize flexibility and control over sort of trying to take something off the shelf from a vendor that they're offering you. Even if it might be a great tool, you still got to integrate it and operate it and figure out how to maintain it. So.
No, I think, Nathan, you hit the nail on the head in the standpoint of just like long-term scalability, kind of thinking about that tool, where it's going to grow. I mean, again, maybe dating myself in this room, I remember when watching Facebook's talk about React, whatever that was, 12, 13 years ago now, and we're all like, man, this is not going to make it. Well, guess what? It's still here. It's still around. And I think it's kind of, where do we measure that? And I think that kind of goes into one of my, final questions in this group is just, and I'll open it up to the group, is kind of, as you're looking at legacy systems and you're thinking about these AI tools, like, how do you make that decision of, like, do I replace it? Do I wrap something around it? Do I take that risk with that, like, super cool startup that's doing awesome stuff in our realm? I think, like you were alluding to, Nathan, I'm sure, like, with Grainger, for example, there's really cool stuff in manufacturing and AI happening, but sometimes you're looking at, like, a 3-person startup, and you're like, are you still gonna be here? And so I think that's kind of my question I'd like to ask to the group to wrap this up, is just kind of like, when do you make those decisions? I think we even joked about it on the call, where I had met with some airline companies like 10 years ago, and it was crazy to me that, like, you're still booking a ticket, but in the end, green screen was what was booking your ticket and how it was all going through. You had the nicest platform ever through Kayak or whatever it was that you booked, but in the end, it was still green screen. And so, like, how do you decide when you wrap something over top of it, and AI is doing a lot of that, and how do you finally just say, I'm out, and I have to move on? And it's really, really hard, because, like, when we're talking about the airlines, you're talking about thousands of flights a day across how many airlines do we have? Hundreds of airlines.
Well, I think there are definitely like legacy systems, even though we call it legacy. But like you said, there's still a lot of these mainframes that are humming in the background that's doing a bulk of all of the processing. And I do have to say, like, maybe it's not like, okay, let's rip it out and replace it with new things. Of course, it will take years too, especially when some of these airlines, and they are very complex rules that I don't think you can actually use any agents to tell the agents to do it, that it doesn't have a clue. Like, think of all the stuff that goes into figuring out, how your airline booking tickets and all the rules, and there are different rules. That's amazing. And it's really like the work of many people, like 1,000, maybe 100,000 of people working on it. So you can't just simply rip it out. But I think we're talking now about applied AI, new AIs, but maybe we can identify certain like processing within this complex giant thing that is still very important. So we want to keep those business logic that is not easy to replace. But whereas there are maybe integration part or some gluing part, some kind of connectors, you can actually be maybe using AI to like advance or improve the speed, things like that. So in other words, whatever we're trying to change, we do need to first understand the system as a whole, what it is doing, and then identify areas that we can be using AI. So the question, or I should say the answers would be, it all depends. Depends on the kind of things that you're working with, the systems, and how complex it is. And is it worth replacing, many years, 50 years of, many collective wisdom? It's not very easy to replace. But I think definitely maybe leverage AI, put it at, use it for what it is good at. Maybe like processing a lot of data monotonously, going through a lot of paperwork. Then you can maybe use RAG to do things like that, for example. But the really complex business flow, I don't think it's very easy to replace, is what I think. So.
And you were alluding to it, like, I think that great opportunities would be areas in your code base where you've got a very clear demarcation where you can maybe connect it to an interface that it understands. In the case of that website that I had inherited, it was just one big mess. So there wasn't really an opportunity to, kind of use AI in one spot. It was just required a whole new strategy. But if you can understand like what business piece that is very well documented, we know what we want, we know how we measure success, and it's sort of off on its own, I think that's a great kind of opportunity to be able to use it.
First of all, to adding to Mary's point, I think what she's trying to get to is like where your system is sitting at. So I think the first thing is just to measure the business impact in terms of metrics, right? Like where you're trying to move the needle, where you have the most pressing areas of concerns that you want to eliminate with AI, and decide like, does it even make sense to like replace it all, or just start with like something augmenting human on the side so that you don't disrupt your decades old like system in single like something that fails, rather like just apply at a smaller level into maybe a particular use case and then evaluate like if it adding the real value that you measured it will.
I'm kind of paraphrasing here because I want to keep the group moving on and kick to the audience here soon, but all of you, I think, have dealt with executives at a different level when it comes to kind of pushing AI. So before we jump to the next section, I have a few questions here that I'm just kind of paraphrasing that I'd love to just kind of know your guys' thoughts on, like, how do you know when it's right to kind of push your executive team on AI? How do you help them understand? We have a lot of, I feel like executives now with AI are kind of like when I was pitching apps, 20 years ago saying, hey, we need to build an iOS app. It was kind of like magic. we're at the same thing now, I think, with executives, but something that I think about differently with executives now is most of them are probably close to or not millennials like myself, where we feel like we grew up with technology. So I think it becomes a little bit harder, because before I feel like I could pitch an iOS app 20 years ago and they're like, oh, it's magic, like trust this guy, it's good. Now I feel like it's a little harder because we all feel like we've grown up with technology. I'm like, yeah, I was the first person with cable internet and I had a Nintendo and like I know these things. And so how do you kind of like gauge that with executives now where I feel like they maybe know more but don't know enough maybe to be dangerous? And it's kind of like a tough world. And maybe that's a loaded question that I'm sharing, but I see some nods, so I'll just kind of open it to the group.
I guess I can jump in. So Grainger is almost a 100-year-old company, and you don't get to be a 100-year-old company by changing your strategy every 2 years, right? And so there's a lot of discussion of 5, 10, and 20-year horizons at Grainger, right? And I think when you think about something that's as transformational as AI, you have to understand what is it doing for us and why. What are our long-term horizon goals? And how do we keep consistent about what are our values and what are we building towards year after year, 5, 10, 20, 97 or 8, whatever we are, years down the road. And so I think to me that's really important because there is a lot of benefit you can gain from integrating AI into your work. In pretty much any role, I think we've seen examples, and those examples may vary, right? It's been a transformational technology if you are a software developer or engineer, right? And in other cases, maybe if you're in the creative space, for example, maybe it's less obvious how you're using it like on a day-to-day basis. But I think that there's no place where it can't have an impact. And so I think the key is to connect that long-term goal of where are we trying to move as a company, as an organization, to what are the tangible benefits that you can realize day in and day out. And I think, it becomes very obvious when you can sort of see kind of the art of the possible and how that connects to really furthering those goals, right? If you are consistently an organization that's measuring success and understanding how do you continue to optimize and improve process, you have frameworks to measure whether or not this new tool of AI is actually going to be useful, because you are consistently looking at your process, you're consistently looking at and measuring yourself on how you are doing to improve, to gain share, gain customers, improve your products, features, reduce, waste in your supply chain, whatever it is that you measure yourself on. And then you have these metrics and these guiding principles. And so I think, that's one of the nice things about, again, being an industry that has this, a company that has this long horizon, is that we can bring these things in, we can really actually experiment and apply them and have a baseline to understand actual real value versus just the hype you might hear on the outside world.
To add to that, I think where I've seen AI really be successful are with people and executives and founders who know what they want and they know how to evaluate it. And I know that sounds maybe counterintuitive in a sense because you'd think, oh, AI can do a lot of discovery, but it's just like traditional software development. If you don't know exactly what you want the AI to do and how you're going to measure that, to the point you were making, it's going to fail. And then, being very transparent about those metrics and taking that and making a human decision on those metrics to feed it back into what you're building. So.
Yeah, I think just adding to what Nathan and Jen shared, I think tying it back to the business metrics is such an important thing, because executives would not like if you are just doing it for the sake of technology moving in that direction. But then I think another thing to also care about is if you're a product company or something, the differentiation, what differentiation you're bringing onto the table in the market that will position you as a strong differentiator. So I think along with metrics, that's another area to bring it forward.
Yeah, so I think it is very true. Sometimes working with executives, I believe it can be also very challenging, especially maybe companies like Grainger. They're like over 100 years old type of company, which I also worked for before, like IBM, for example. But I think if they are very afraid of the risk, right? Because we already have certain established kind of reputation doing certain things. And if we're going to introduce change, it's always they tend to be, not everybody, tend to be resisting to that because they are afraid what if you do something wrong and it's going to change and cause a big mess, opening a can of worms, things like that. But I think like, Ishu saying, you all were saying too, having some way of measuring what it is now and maybe suggest ways to improve, but also too at the same time kind of measuring the kind of risk and how much risk are we willing to take and that type of stuff, then it can certainly help too and have a more organized way of saying that this is the plan, what to do. Doing in small steps is always also like very good too, and just prove it and step by step being able to show that, yeah, it's not so bad. Once you complete a small project, you can move on to something else. And just don't, it's good to think big, but act small, one step at a time to kind of build up that trust from the executives. I think that's the way to go. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Before I get into questions, well, one, Ishu, you said something that I think just always resonates with me. As I work with startup founders, I always think about, like, what is your moat? Like, what are you building that is going to be completely different, that people aren't going to be able to, I don't know, for lack of better words, pun intended, be able to swim through? And so what I'd love to get into before we get into the questions is just kind of ask the group around, how many of you in this room feel like your organization is truly ready for AI, or is building AI, you feel good about it, you're happy, you're excited, you're exuberant? There's maybe 1, 2, 3. Okay, it's a decent amount of hands. How many of you, I guess I kind of know it on the flip side, like a little worried, scared, kind of where things are going. It's okay. It's a safe room, safe space. So I guess with that, I'd love to just kind of, that gives, I think, the audience, I think, a good, the crowd a good understanding of where we're at, gives our panel a good understanding where we're at. I'd love to just open it up to questions. Don't shout out your question. We have Hannah, don't know, and maybe 1 or 2 others handing out mics. So I'm going to do my best for the next 15, 20 minutes to kind of bounce around. And again, thank you to all of you for just hanging out. Thank you to our panelists. And we're going to kind of dive into some audience questions here. And I think we have our first one Hannah's handing out here.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Christian Gentry with Zeal IT Consultants. Thank you all for the wonderful talk. One of my questions is, when you're looking at your own organization, we're seeing things like OpenClaw, all these agents come in. Claude is directly committing to people's repos and code in organizations. What do you think the biggest moat is for your own organization to being able to have a fully agentic workflow where agents are gathering requirements, distilling that into backlog items, writing code, testing it, securing it, deploying it, writing change orders, getting that in front of customers? What's holding back your organization from getting to that fully agentic workflow?
Coming with the heat.
Can I answer that? Go ahead. Yeah, I
Thank you.
believe what's holding is the specific domain you're working in. I'm working in healthcare, and we treat all AI tools as augmenting the work we are doing rather than replacing the systems that we have already built or replacing the human that the code, everything we do. It's basically making it more efficient so that people who are to the core of that domain specific knowledge can make the right decisions. They can validate what the AI is doing rather than just doing the routine tasks. So we see that as a collaboration with AI rather than just replacing human from the whole loop.
To add to that, I think trust is that fundamental thing. How many of you here would just trust your, Claude to reply to emails, on your behalf? 100%. I trust ya. I don't think anybody would. So I think, when you deploy agents into production, like you're going to want to measure, of course, that data and then validate that data. And until you have enough trust that the input to output is actually above the threshold that's acceptable to you, you're going to always have that human in the loop giving that feedback to adjust, what that looks like. Then you can get that trust and earn, give the agent, the ability to earn to maybe send emails for you, but only after it's proven it.
I'm going to answer your question with a question. Who here's work was stopped by a GitHub outage this week? Only a few of you? Too few of you are writing code. So I think that my short answer is that systems. I think the systems are trying to catch up, to be honest. I think the rate at which individuals are pushing changes to systems that we're used to humans being the only people writing code and making changes to those systems is just skyrocketing, right? And that's a good thing, I think. I think being able to iterate, test, and change your whatever it is, your services and your product is a good thing. But I think our systems are still trying to catch up. I don't know what GitHub's reliability score was for 2025, but in 2026, they're below 2 nines even. They're at like 98, 97 in certain parts of their system because there's just so much throughput. And so I think you're starting to see some patterns emerge, right? You're starting to see patterns where you can give an agentic coding agent an entire sandbox environment and let it rip, right? And you can feel pretty confident that that's not going to touch your production system directly without some review, without some checks, without really robust integration tests that people have talked about, without validations from data and examples that you have sanctioned. And so that human operator and those systems, I think, are just really working to catch up at this point.
Yeah, I think you all said it. You all said it out really, really well. I think there's still time right now for the whole, that whole flow to get caught up. And we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. I think it's going to take some time. I do have to say, too, I remember just sitting down trying to do some coding and realize it gets frustrated because it's just, some things are just not all ready yet. You still, for example, doing vibe coding, I can generate using Vercel the other day. And I realized, okay, it generates, it's fine. It jump-started me, but then at the same time, I still need to spend a fair amount of time upgrading or updating the code manually, too. So it's not like you can't fully be relying on it to do all vibe coding at this point, as an example. So, yeah.
Here.
You've all hinted or commented specifically about the indeterministic nature of large language models, significant doubts that it'll ever create novel ideas. Just curious if the panel here agrees that the current and fundamentals of these non-deterministic token guessing machines are going to be able to do these things and be reliable and be novel, or if you think it's going to take something fundamentally different.
I have a take. So, decision science. We all make decisions based on heuristics that we learn throughout our life as we develop. And we make decisions based on a distribution. We can be very sensitive to noise or not, and it really depends on a lot of input and different factors that come in. So as humans, we're never going to be 100% perfect, but we've tuned over time to be right maybe 99% of the time. I do see a very similar set of distribution math in LLMs, and I do believe you can get there. However, I think that the number of inputs into there is complex. So can it happen to where you're so confident that an LLM is making a decision at least just as good as a human, but with maybe more context? I think we can get there. Are we there yet? I don't think so. But I'm interested in the theory behind it and seeing how this evolves.
Yeah, I also want to add to it, it also depends on the use case, which you're applying to. These LLMs, which are trained on general data, are good at maybe getting better on the general tasks. Maybe email writing, they can get better at it. But then when you think about applying it in production to your use case, or specific what kind of use case you're applying to, they're far there. We have personally been building smaller fine-tuned models on domain-specific areas, and they do far better than these large language models because they are not there yet overall. So maybe in some areas they will be there, but not all the areas.
Hannah, maybe here?
Hey, so I guess in the definition of like legacy systems, I guess we're kind of looking at this from a perspective of age, but I guess the other way to look at it is a perspective of dependencies, right? That when you're building these large systems that have been around for a long amount of time, there are a large amount of people who are depending on what you're building and understanding kind of interfaces and trusting that there are particular agreements or contracts that are there and exist. And you made a good example of like airlines, right? We have like the GDS, Green Screen, Butler, all of these systems that people are interfacing with, and you might have something like the Expedia or Kayak or something like that that people might be interfacing with on the front end. But I guess more in the question of legacy systems, when you have all of these like very deep dependency chains, what are you actually using AI for in these cases? Especially because you, I guess, are seeing the level of change that's happening in the industry. What are you actually using these for, and where do you see the kind of safety or the risk or things like that in that front?
I think a lot of companies who are starting to use and adapt their AI systems primarily are trying to focus on areas to make it more efficient. So that's where I think they have to think about, like, are they changing the customer experience, or are they just like making their tasks more efficient by like speeding up, maybe cutting down the forces there, and like just trying to like level up the amount of work they can get done like faster out there. So it's just like about how they balance it there, like what are they trying to achieve, right? So it's not like easy or one fit all. It's all about like where they see the value of like applying it. I have seen like a lot of companies also like replacing their whole system just because of improving the overall customer experience, because current legacy system has so much issues with integrating to different like third-party tools and so much dependency, but then they are also like restricting their overall experience. But at the same time, if you think about regulated industries or any industries which depend on like historical data, let's say financial or healthcare, where your decisions are being made on history of like hundreds of like, sorry, not hundreds, but decades of like years of like overall data that is accumulating for your health, or decisions are made on that, you cannot easily replace those areas, right? Like you have to decide like, okay, maybe in these areas you slowly focus on the efficiency side of things, while on others you can like replace everything.
And for me, where I have used AI, so as I mentioned, I inherited this undocumented, unknown website, just a big mess. What I used it for was I used it in a very defined sequence. So I used it to, collect transcripts of people who might understand it, the documentation that exists, and I had to do a static code analysis and try to tell me what's going on there, understand the inputs, the outputs, try to understand the data flow, and ultimately use that to build tests. And then in here is where I had the human in the loop to validate the test, because if you write a wrong test and you say a wrong test is true, you're in for a load of trouble, because then you're just building on top of incorrect assumptions. So you always have to have that human. So in my case there, I used it to do kind of information gathering to inform the developers of how something is used, so that when we eventually got that thing to production, you were more informed and you could mitigate risk by just making more informed decisions.
So I think it's just one note to kind of for what Ishu was saying. Probably is good right now. The state of AI is good for is to like process a lot of paperwork. In my previous company, actually, I was working with the financial director, because they were talking about how going through all the invoices every month was a painful thing. You have to identify, the clerk actually had to go in and identify certain, kind of looking for certain customer, some vendor. They had to page through all of the documents almost by hand. So I think those are the things that we attempted and did, like a RAG application that worked reasonably well. It's basically going through all these invoices and have the AI do it, and that turned out to be very good. So those are the kind of, I think, use cases that you can definitely use AI, like kind of safe. You feel more confident in using it for that. Plus also some cases like computer vision, where you're dealing with graphical data. And so those things, for example, you're off by a couple pixels is okay, that type of stuff, but not like financial data that you need to do financial transaction, I think. So that's what I think it is. So
I think as Hannah's looking for somebody next, the couple things that I would add is one, again, thank you to our panelists for doubling down on this is a tough topic. If I wanted to just go back into like the airline example, I recently had to reschedule my airline ticket. I was able to talk to an AI bot, give it my confirmation number. It came back to me of all of my options of could I change my flight, what it would cost, all of that, and then eventually connected me to a human. And I think that's my second point that I'll make in this is as you're having these AI bots or whatever you want to call them, having these conversations, having a very distinct injection point as to when they're going to a human is so important right now, because I don't know how many of us have probably been stuck in a loop with AI where we're just like, oh my God, all I want to do is just talk to a human and get there. And I think that's the biggest thing that I would share in this moment is as you're kind of fine tuning those models, maybe have your model exit a little earlier than your developers are thinking. So your customers are a little bit happier as you go along. Hannah, I think you had found somebody.
I have a comment followed by a question. So last year, I've seen the other side of AI excitement like in a different way. Working with a lot of small and medium businesses, and many of them were actually excited about AI because they haven't done any automation in the last 20, 25 years. They just use spreadsheets because they never saw return on investment with automation. Now with the AI, they are thinking, okay, AI can do this, we can probably automate this. And they are also excited and working with to see how they can replace some of their retiring employees with AI, right? So return of investment is one of the things that I've seen quite a bit. So do you have, do you come across use cases where you see that, oh, we can use AI for this, but what are we going to get it back? And then you have to drop them. What experience do you have in those things?
ROI comes from like a two-way street. Basically, one is ROI of you implementing the AI for your business or your product, but another is like what you're making a change for your clients as well. If you're able to show to your clients how much you're saving or what investment will look like from their side, that's also like, I think, a win-win. So I believe we have been directly working with like healthcare companies where we are trying to automate their engagements to free up the time of the clinicians and do all these routine tasks, and we are able to do it for them. So they see the value in it because they are not only able to save the time of the human, but they're also able to handle more conversations than before because there's a limit to if a human is doing while your agents can do it like at a wide scale.
And I think for small businesses, I think the cost of the solution plays a big role, obviously, in the ROI. And I find for really small businesses, they want simple things like custom GPTs, but they just don't know how to build it. And they need help to understand, like, what is it that we're measuring? How will this GPT be used? And how can I maintain it moving forward? Because they're not going to pay for custom software. They can't afford that. So you have to think about that in the model when you calculate that full ROI for them overall.
I think sorry, I keep adding things. The one thing I would add, because you said Excel and kind of like changing process in that, and I've helped a few companies with that. The biggest thing that I would think about as you're looking at like people that maybe have these like massive spreadsheet processes that you're now trying to move on, you're now talking about potentially building a database that needs to store that data that then is going to move that to OpenAI or something like that that's going to build that back out. And so that's the only caution that I would give as I've worked with a few companies in that finance space when it comes to Excel spreadsheets is you do need to have, again, like we talked about, that human in the middle that like understands how a database is built and how you're going to structure this. We ended up being able to build it a lot better and faster, but we had to take their entire spreadsheet and turn it into a database and then have that database talk to OpenAI that then kicked out a model that then kicked out something else beyond that and built the front end. So just be a little bit careful in that standpoint because OpenAI AI tools are, in my opinion, nowhere near ready to house that kind of data, and you need to have something like Superbase or I don't know, in between that's going to help you?
Hi, I'm Don. I'm a physician from the University of Minnesota Institute for Healthcare Informatics. This has been great for me. My friend and I are sitting here talking about the rapid technological changes that occurred when we were growing up, which was the push button phone and the color TV. Okay, so, but I'm thinking a lot these days and starting to interface with P3 and the Chicago Quantum Center. And, the question I have for you all is, what's your opinion about the rapid acceleration of computational velocity? I mean, I've heard expectations of 100 petabytes in, 100 petabytes of qubits in 1 second. How are we going to be ready for that?
A lot of water. Sorry to say it, but
I'm not an expert on quantum computing, but I think like there's an inherent fear underlying your question, which I think is natural to any new technology, right? And I think that like the other thing that I think about is reality of a headline or a soundbite or a research result, a very valid research result, versus like implementation at scale. I'm guessing this panel is going to sort of second me when I say that AI is not a new concept, right? AI and forms have been around for decades. Generative AI has been around for more than a decade. I've been working with it for around a decade. Now it's gotten better and things have accelerated adoption, but those things are less about the fundamental capabilities. They are, for sure, but they're less about the fundamental capabilities than they are about like economies of scale and how do we operate and scale these things, right? The first GPT model came out years before ChatGPT went live. And that's because we just didn't, as an industry, understand how do we operate these things for millions of people simultaneously. And so, again, I started by saying I'm not an expert on quantum computing, and I'm not. I think it's very interesting, and I've toyed with it a little bit. But I think we're still a ways probably away from that being at operational scale and capacity. But I don't know, that's my off-the-cuff answer.
Hannah, do you got anybody?
Yeah. Hi. Hey everyone, Dinesh here. My question is, so until say last 2-3 years, we've seen LLMs come a long way. Now within a few weeks also we're getting model updates with good benchmarks. We had backend developers, front-end developers, database engineers. Now every builder or developer has an AI component in theirs. With models becoming way better, how are your engineers being upskilled to catch up with the pace? Are they ready to build production-grade systems with these models?
I'll start, and then I want everybody to weigh in. I think what I've observed is that the people that are getting the most value are the ones who are adopting and experimenting early and very intentionally. I think that I'm sort of like, I don't know, old school in my approach to building software, and that's because I actually enjoy the process of writing code, of writing tests. I still like the TDD cycle. I like seeing those green checkboxes. It's very like satisfying to me, right? The little dopamine hits, right? When you're, yay, my test passed. But I think the people that I'm seeing who are really scaling their ability to produce new software are those that are able to move from syntax and implementation to sort of context and control. Sort of how can I move to that almost product-minded thinking where I'm instructing an AI agent or a team of AI agents with very clear acceptance criteria, very clear implementation plans, where you're having conversations with these systems about dependencies, about architectural trade-offs, about implementation details, about nuance of your domain or system. And so I think that's the kind of skill set that we are really seeing and encouraging is understanding how to experiment and how to leverage that more sort of design thinking versus being really overly focused on sort of process or syntax.
To add to that, it's basically like shifting the skill set of individuals as well. Like it's not traditionally like, okay, only a machine learning person can work with a model, or like engineering can only use it for coding. I think the skill set is going towards a balance of all. Like it's a mixture of domain knowledge, data literacy, and AI fluency. And people who are combining all these things together are able to like augment the work they are doing in their day-to-day to take it to production scale. But of course, it's not there to replace the human in the loop, because we still need the engineers and the domain experts to identify the real value, like where they're applying this AI and how like validate what it's doing as well before it goes to like ship to production.
If I could add to that, I think the key skill coming in is, not necessarily your ability to code, but your ability to evaluate. So can you evaluate that the code written by the agent is correct? I have an example that I also like to share. Is like when I got into agentic AI, I challenged myself, hey, you've led teams at scale for many years. Can you lead a team of agents to build a production level SaaS product? And so I did. Had my front end developer, my back end developer, all those. I was orchestrating them. And I learned like what's common about leading a team, an agentic team to a human team, and also what's completely different. And one of the interesting insights of the similarities is like how many developers here have received a Jira ticket that's just like one-liner? And they're like expected to build out something that's great and read some minds. Well, guess what? The agentic team does the same thing. If you're not clear with your specs up front about what you want and all the different constraints of the product you're going to build, it'll build it for you. It'll expose secrets on the front end, but it'll build it for you. It'll over-engineer and write dead code paths. It'll do it. So without those constraints, with like a spec-based approach, spec-based development approach, I think that's where the skill set's going to be. So, similar to what you had said, is you kind of have to have that product mind. Like, what am I delivering at the end? And previous to what we were talking about too, like, what is success? What's the data that's going to drive that? What am I building? So that's how I see it evolving, 100%.
I want to add to what Jen mentioned about like evaluation. That's such an important point here, basically, because if you think about the traditional operation for teams, like even data science teams and like engineering teams, the way they were like measuring and evaluating traditional models were more about like in a deterministic way, like input X and output Y. But these AIs are not like that deterministic. They're probabilistic. So we also have to shift our mind to measuring them a little differently, like why it's failing, like understand the behavior of it rather than treating it as a black box. Like if you input X, it will come Y as output.
I think I also want to add one more thing is about communication. I think it used to be, right, when we were coding, like the traditional way of coding, we actually have to talk like a machine. But these days, ChatGPT, okay, generative AI, you actually have to speak like a real human. So in order to get what you want, you need to be able to express what you want, in a more like human way, so to speak. Yeah. So I think that's another thing. I feel that maybe in today's the way it is going for computing, maybe like the really traditional introvert, so to speak, right? Engineers may find it harder to do because they tend to speak like machines. So it's basically, again, it goes into, if you want to be more successful, so to speak, to do this level of coding with AI, with the model, you have to communicate really clearly what you want. You need to specify exactly what you want, the format that you want from the data, things like that. So that's another skill area that we cannot ignore nowadays. So
I think as Hannah's finding our final question here, Mary, I will double down on that because I don't know how many times maybe this is wrong of me, but I literally just tell ChatGPT like, this is terrible, like you did wrong.
Yeah.
And you just kind of like move on from there because I feel like you have to have that human conversation. But I think, what I've heard kind of all of you say throughout all of this is one of the core tenets that I've hired people for has always been curiosity. And when I was hiring engineers at multiple consulting firms, people used to always tell me, how do you hire an engineer that's good for consulting versus product? And back then I used to say, I'm hiring people that in consulting like want to change rapidly and want to be curious and want to learn new stuff, like they're going to be the ones that are learning VR over the weekend so we can make that pitch to a client on a Monday. Whereas, product devs are kind of like, this is the process, this is what we're doing. And I think that's probably, to me, the biggest thing that's shifting in engineering right now is everybody kind of has to shift to that, like, I'm learning and I'm adapting, and, you just need to be curious, because I think all of you have kind of talked about that a little bit. Like, you have to be curious with the AI engine that you're talking to. You can't just say ones and zeros, it's going to kick back it. You need to say, no, I wanted it to build this, and you didn't, And I think that's the one thing that I would leave with the group in this is, like, hire people that are curious, because I think that's what's going to kind of adapt us as we move through this crazy kind of world that we're in right now. Is you have to find people that are just willing to, I don't know, in startups we call it building the airplane while it's in the, it's taken off and it's in the air and you're hoping that you're going to land. And we're going to do one final question before I wrap it up with the panelists here.
Hello, I'm Abraham. So I'm a data engineer and AI engineer. And at my current company with data governance, we have mitigated and lower risk and downtime by essentially not allowing to use open source to write our code. So my question is, I'm newly back onto the market. Is there still space for engineers that are the creators of AI, not necessarily the user of AI?
Yeah, I would say definitely, because currently, if you think about all these models which are getting better and better every day, we are having a new version released, they're getting cheaper. There are going to be so many of them. There's going to be at some point like reaching to a peak, like what we are comparing against, right? And then model is just not one aspect of it. It's the people who are like using that model to shape something out of it to get the business outcome. And as I mentioned earlier, the skill set is shifting a little bit. Like earlier, engineers used to develop the application, data scientists used to develop the model side of it, but then now it's becoming like mixing up the role a little bit. People who have the domain knowledge, who have the data literacy, and who have the AI fluency about like building the tool and building a whole system around it are going to be definitely required in the market.
Yeah, I'd say just brief out. You said you described yourself as a data engineer and an AI engineer, and so I think just to build on that point, like having fluency with data, having a mindset and understanding for how do I understand sort of semantics of data, I think is really helpful. And the other thing I would say, and that I would tell anybody who's maybe in the market, newly in the market, fresh to the market from the university, is think about, I always, and this is not, the world's not perfect, but I always like to think about like what gives you energy in your work? What are the things that you like can sit and do for hours and hours and hours, and then sort of like pull back to what does that mean in terms of a role or a company or a context or a domain that you can operate in. There's a lot of different, are there still roles, people building the AI? And I think it sort of depends on what you mean. I think there are still people who are doing research into the fundamentals of learning. You asked a question about like, are these LLMs and these systems going to continue improving? There are still people who, I sort of supplanted my view in the question. There are still people who believe that AGI is a thing that's coming, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But there are definitely a lot of people fundamentally looking at, is LLM the end-all be-all? Are there other architectures, right? So it kind of depends on where do you want to be. Do you want to be fundamental in that sort of algorithmic, very academic thinking? Do you want to be building, right, and scaling? Do you want to be evaluating and putting in guardrails and safety? Do you want to be focusing on a problem, on a people or a population? So I mean, that's like constantly, when I think about evolutions or hops in my career, it's been born of two things, like what was I curious about and what did I enjoy doing, what gave me energy, and a little bit of luck and circumstance, right? So.
Thank you all so much. Thank you all for your questions. Really appreciate it. As we wrap things up, what I I'm looking at my question here, but I'm going to probably pivot to something I normally ask, which is just, as you think about the crowd that we met tonight, the questions, things that we've talked about, what's kind of like your 30-second, 60-second elevator advice, final words of wisdom that you would give to the folks in the crowd tonight before we disperse to happy hour?
Context matters. Context matters, period. And I think we talked a lot about AI, never more so than with AI systems does context matter.
Measurement is fundamental. You build on bad data, you're just gonna amplify that with AI. So measure, know what you're building, know what you have, and be honest, be brave enough to know what you don't know and go find out. So measure.
I second the thought about measurement because I'm a huge believer in that, to be honest. But another thing is governance first, in my opinion, because when you're working in a particular real client data, it's about how the audit trail looks like, and you need to be able to prove that. So measurement and your guardrails, your governance in place, so you can show that you can reproduce the data, you can validate every single output out of it, and you can explain it.
I guess for me it will be open and be flexible and be curious. I think that's what I would kind of suggest everybody to be. So, yeah.
Thank you all so much. As we wrap, I mentioned this earlier in the beginning, but thank you to the Tech in Motion team, Max, Hannah, the rest of the crew that they have here, to Matter, who's hosted us. We don't get to have events like this if they don't show up and coordinate. So seriously, thank you all for having us. Let's give a round of applause for all of them. Secondly, I'd love to give a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you for taking time out of your last, week or so as we prepped, as we built this. Really means a lot to us. And then lastly, we don't get to have events unless people like you show up. So kudos to all of you for coming out and showing up. I'm so excited that I continue to see Chicago showing up in person for events. So seriously, all of you, thank you. Give yourselves a round of applause for being here tonight. Thank you. And that's all we have. We'll be around for the next 45 minutes or so doing, kind of happy hour-ish out there. And yeah, thank you again so much for showing up. Really appreciate it. Thank you all.
Yep, and thank you to Gregg too. Yeah, thank you for hosting.